Of course, there is one interest rate for everyone, but I think one can manage with this. There's also one interest rate for the entire United States, and we have very different conditions in the different states.
The difference is, though, it's just one. That's one country, of course, isn't it, Thomas? And in this case, we're dealing with many different countries.
I thought you would say that. No, we have diverse areas that live with one interest rates, and then there are other conditions that make this work, right? People point to the fiscal transfers that are taking place in the U.S., to the flexibility of the labor. I'm not saying that we don't have a problem. I'm just saying that we found out that there are deficiencies in EMU. We can fix them, and this is where I probably disagree with David, who says, I agree with him, we have a problem, we have a serious problem. Where I would probably disagree with him is that I said, we can fix it. It's not all lost, but we have to work hard to do that.
And what about the German banks, Thomas, including Deutsche Bank, that lent huge amounts of money? Your bank lent huge amounts of money to Greece, believing it was relatively risk-free because there was only one currency. It couldn't change the amount of money they were going to get back because there was going to be no currency movement. Greece and Germany shared a currency.
Well, if I may quote my CFO, who says that our exposure is very, very small. The total exposure of the German banks to Greece is about 40 billion euros. That's a small fraction of what, let's say, the U.S. banks had in exposure to the U.S. real estate sector. I don't want to belittle the problem. It is a problem, but I also want to put it into perspective. Let's look at Greece. Greece has about 3% of the euro area GDP. David was comparing it to Germany in the 30s. I don't think that we are talking here about the right proportion. Of course, it's bad for the Greeks to have to do this. It's bad for the Irish who have to do this. But I think it's not really the core of EMU which is going here off track. I mean, look at Germany and France. They're okay. Even Italy is hanging in. So we have a peripheral problem. And even if you look at the periphery, not all the countries are the same. I would actually give the Irish a lot of credit for being able to turn things around. The markets think so themselves. Of course, Greece is under fire. Greece has a problem, perhaps Portugal as well. So these are cases we have to deal with. But together, they are about 5% of the euro area GDP. That's not such a big deal.
All right, but let's look at Greece. And David McWilliams, obviously, Ireland has been going through its own crisis. It's been struggling to bring down its debt. It's imposed some pretty painful measures on its citizens, a lot of public sector spending cuts, tax rises, the sort of thing that Greece is about to go through now. Do you think Ireland has any lesson for Greece? Is there something that you can say that might reassure Greeks this is going to work?
Well, I think the spin in Ireland has been that we have made a huge adjustment. The big adjustment in Ireland is we've actually put aside close to 50% of our GNP to bail out our banking system, which seemed like, for most citizens, a very easy decision to take on the part of the government, whereas cutting public sector salaries was a very, very difficult decision to take. But look at the big picture. Ireland needs to sort its own house in order. We need to get competitive again. We need to get back to a stage where we were probably in the late 1990s, where the economy was growing and we were generating a lot of employment for our own people. This demands a massive reduction in our price level and our wage levels. And the question is, can we do this in Ireland without leading to very, very high levels of unemployment? And can we do it in Greece? And can we do it in Spain? Can we do it in Portugal? I mean, I would say that Thomas is probably a bit sanguine in the sense that over the course of the last 10 years, certain countries have become hyper-competitive in the euro, the main one being Germany. And other countries have become much less competitive, ourselves, the Spaniards, the Greeks, the Portuguese. And then one of the reasons we became less competitive is that we have sucked in huge amount of German capital, which has driven up our price level, which has given us all a good time. Our lifestyle has gone up commensurately, and that's us and the Spaniards. We've had these boom and busts. Now, to unravel that without our own exchange rate demands an extraordinary political will. Now, here in Ireland, the government is only holding on by 2 seats in the Parliament, and the opinion polls show the government down at 20 to 25% popularity. So, in the context of the political cycle, I think it's going to be very difficult for those of us in Europe, not in core Europe, and I mean by not in France, not in Germany, to become competitive again without tolerating enormous levels of unemployment, and unemployment begets instability, instability begets capital flight, and we end up back in the same place. And this is exactly why the markets have looked at the European Union's huge, like phenomenal 120 billion rescue packet for Greece and kind of shrugged their shoulders because it doesn't answer the fundamental question: how does Ireland, Greece, Portugal, Spain pay for all this extra debt, number one, and number two, how do we, in the context of the euro, generate economies that are sufficiently competitive that we can employ our people again?
And Thomas, there is an element of symbolism here, isn't there? Because, as you say, Greece is only a small part of the Eurozone economy, but to the markets, it's symptomatic of something else, isn't it? And that's why you've got this talk of contagion.
Well, of course. This is why we need to deal with the Greek situation correctly. But also the markets make a huge distinction between Greece and Ireland. Well, they're better in Greece right now because they fear that the Greek economy, the Greek society, is not capable of dealing with this enormous challenge that is put to them. The markets actually have some faith in Ireland, and I would be interesting to hear David to comment on that. Is that faith the markets have in Ireland misplaced? Would Ireland be better off if they would now go out of the euro and try it on their own? I mean, I have my doubts, but I would be interesting to hear David on that.
But Thomas, the markets don't seem to have faith, though, with Spain and Portugal. They are testing the boundaries there, seeing whether they're the next two countries in the eurozone to be picked off. What do you think about that?
Well, yes, because Spain is dithering. Ireland has gone forward and has said, look, here we have a tough program. We want to go through with it. We can do it. We have done it in the past. And watch us. Now, Spain has been dithering. This is the Zapatero government is not realizing yet the seriousness of the situation.
David McWilliams.
Could I come in on that issue? What the markets like, Thomas, I think, is that Ireland is in the course of turning itself into a large debt servicing agency for growth and, let's say, debts of the past. And the backstop, of course, is the ECB. So what the markets like is that the Irish will generate an economy that might recover, but that economy will not be a growth economy. That economy will not be somewhere where the return on equity is very high, but it'll be an economy that is sufficiently able to pay back debt, in effect a large debt servicing agency. Now, I believe that that is not going to work in the long term. We have 500,000 people unemployed out of a workforce of 2 million. We have negative equity. We have a banking system that is bust. All these things the Irish people know. And what is quite interesting is that we, the Irish people, have started to save enormously because we are terrified and we are petrified. The financial markets seem to think we're in a better position than we ourselves think. Now, I hope...
Well, do they really feel that, David McWilliams? Because we've heard, for example, from the credit ratings agency Moody, they say the fallout from Greece could affect Ireland and Britain, as well as those countries that are in the firing line already. In other words, they could be the next countries to be picked on.
Jonathan, there is no doubt. I worked in the Irish Central Bank during the currency crisis of 1992-93. Our view had largely been that we are different to Britain. We are different. Ireland is getting its debt-GDP ratio down. The markets, at the end of the day, listened to our platitudes and sold our currency. And it was a very simple thing. You might remember it started in Italy, then it went to Spain, then it came to Ireland, then it went to Belgium, then it went to Netherlands. What this idea of contagion is simply the market saying to themselves, we don't believe. Now, what has happened in the last week or so is that the markets are taking money out of the likes of Ireland, and I think Thomas is right. It's much less dramatic than it is in Greece, but ultimately the Irish bond market has sold off. The German bond market has been bought. There is a flight of capital from the periphery to the core, and it doesn't really matter what our government says. People know that, is it possible to put 22 billion euros into a bank, for example, like Anglo-Irish, which is one of our bust banks, in the knowledge you'll never get any money back? Investor friends of mine said to me recently that if you're prepared to waste 22 billion of your own government's money or your own people's money, what in God's name would you do with my money? So I think that Thomas is right. At the moment, we are not in the firing line. But ultimately, as this crisis engulfs bond markets, and particularly the euro itself, a country which has a government deficit of 14% of GDP, which is us at the moment, and ultimately has a debt-GDP ratio in general which is exploding at a time when unemployment is rising, can't necessarily escape this.